We are now studying the dissenting view of Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Milveh, he on the top of Mem Zayin Amid Beis, Harei he kipikadon. The law of a milveh is identical with the law of a pikadon. And just like in the case of pikadon, we said there has to be left after the pikadon was lost or destroyed or stolen at least a shear of a shava pruta in order for the Kiddushin to be valid. The same din will apply in the case of a milveh. So the Gemara explains now the Kash on Rav, who says milveh lo tzon nitna v'yena mekudesh ad kan lo pligi. What is the subject and the area of contention amongst the Tanoim? Ella, they're only arguing about Makadish Isha b'milveh shalonish tire heimena shava pruta. If the money that was given to her as alva was lost, totally lost, she doesn't even have one pruta left. And the Gemara is now going to explain the Machlok Shina Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. But everybody agrees that fundamentally Makadish b'milveh is a valid Kiddushin. The question is, if she doesn't have anything left, so what's he giving her now? Demar Savar, according to Tanakama, when a man is Makadish and Isha b'milveh, the Kiddushin is Chal Afal Gavdol Ishtayre Menesh of a Pruta, even though there's nothing left. Why? Because he's being Makadish her with the chov of the milveh, and not with the mos of the milveh. Umar Savar of Shimon Elazar is of the opinion Ishtayre Menesh of a Pruta in lo mishtayre Menesh Pruta lo. Why? Because then, according to Rav Shimon, he's being Makadish with the mos of the milveh. Avakuli Alma, everybody agrees that Makadish b'milveh mikudeshes. This brisa contradicts Rav, who holds that Makadish b'isha b'milveh is Eino Isha Mekudeshes, even though the money of the milveh is in her hands, because milveh lo tzon it, and she owns the milveh before he was Mekadesh. So I mentioned before when we were learning Mem Zayin Amud Aleph that we didn't find any Amoron that disagreed with Rav explicitly, but you see the Gemara is working hard to reject Rav and object to Rav. It must be that the Gemara holds Mekadesh b'milveh Mekudeshes. Or at least that's a dissenting view against Rav. You're asking a kasha, says Rava, from a brisa, if you assume that the brisa is a valid, reliable brisa. No, this is not a reliable brisa. You can't ask a brisa from a kasha on Rav from a brisa mishubeshta. And now Rav is going to prove that this brisa is a brisa mishubeshta and it's an unreliable brisa. Hi pikadon hechidon. If we go back to the reisha of the brisa says, "Amalishas kanshi li v'pikadon." What's the case of pikadon? Either kabel leach rayus, if she was a shomer sachar and she was being paid to watch and guard this pikadon, and a shomer sachar is chayav for gneva and aveda, is hainu milveh. That's exactly a milveh. In other words, since the pikadon was lost, destroyed, or stolen, therefore, she owes him the value of the pikadon because she is considered a poshea and she has to pay. And hainu milvah, meaning that this is mamish the case of a milvah. Now, the Tanakama holds in the case of a milvah that the Kiddushin is valid if he's mochel the milvah, mochel the chov. And that means even though what was left of the mos is less than the shava pruta, or left of the pikadon is less than the shava pruta. So why would he say the Tanakama in the reisha that in the case of pikadon she's a mekudeshes unless the shtayr b'shava pruta? Who cares whether the shtayr b'shava pruta? We're saying now that a Makadish b'milveh according to Tanakama is mekudeshes. He was mochel achov, and that itself is kesef Kiddushin. We don't care whether the shtayr b'shava pruta or not. What you're going to have to, your back is against the wall, you have no choice. but to interpret the Bryce as a case where she did not accept achrayus on the pikadon, she said just, you can leave the pikadon here, but I'm not responsible for the pikadon, then it's not alva. Ihachi, the Tani Sefer. Now we have another case of liflog v'lisnei b'dita. Why did the Brisa feel compelled to write in the Sefer b'mil v'afal pishalo nishtayri menishav pruta v'kudeshes niflog v'nisnei b'dita? In that very case of pikadon, he should have made that distinction. But when do we say that if there's nothing left in pikadon, that's worth a shavapruta? The Kiddushin is not valid. Kisha lo kibla le'achrayis, because she had a no achrayis on the pikadon, and therefore she has no chov. And if she has no chov, the only possible vehicle of Kiddushin would be the chefta itself. And then it depends whether the chefta has a shavapruta or not. Aval kibla le'achrayus, then it becomes a chov. Is afagav l'nishtayri meni shavapruta, even if the entire object was completely lost, destroyed, or stolen, she's got to pay him because she took achrayus, and now he has a chov in her possession, and he can be mekadosh with a chov mikudeshes. Why? Because you could be mekadosh an isha with mechilas milva. Therefore, Rava says, I must conclude that this brisa is a brisa mishubeshta, because otherwise, liflog v'lisnei v'dida. And now Rava is going to refurbish this brisa. Elatritz hach. Here's how you have to be gores in the brisa. Ubemilva afal pishin ishtari menishav pruta ena mekudeshes. In the case of Pikadon, he was mekadosh her with the chefta. And even if 99.9% of the chefta was gone, but the 0.909 that was left is worth a pruta, she's mekudesh with that chefta. But in the case of milva, it doesn't matter what's left at all, because we're holding like Rav that mekadosh b'milva ain't a mekudeshes. And that's because he's not giving her anything, because milva lo tzon. So even if she has a shavapruta from the original milva, it's irrelevant, because milva lo tzon, and that money belongs to her. He's not giving her money. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Mishum Rabbi Meir, how does Rava refurbish the dissenting view of Rabbi Shimon? Milva rehi kipikadon. Just like in the case of Pikadon, where he was mekadosh with a chefta. If nishtayr b'shava pruta, the Kiddushin is valid. So too, in the case of alva, the same din applies. He lent her 1,000, and what she's left, let's say the equivalent of 1,000 prutos, and what was left after the theft, etc., is 1 pruta, and she's mekudeshes. If there's nothing left that's worth a pruta after let's say the waves, took the money and took it out to the sea, then everybody agrees that she's not mekudeshes. So the machlokes now, according to Rava's refurbished brisa, is in a case of nishtayr b'shava pruta, hey mekudeshes or ain't mekudeshes. So what now is the machlokes? I mean, l'chora, intuitively, we would feel that the Tanakama is correct, even if there's a shavah pruta left, but milva lo tzon, and he's not giving her anything new. Why does Reb Shimon say no? Milva rei kipikado, and he can be mekadosh if and when there's a shavah pruta left. The Maikam Miflagi, they're not arguing about milva lo tzon. No, everybody agrees to that. Amar Rabba, Ashkechetinu l'Rabbanan b'Bei Rav the Asvik v'Ka'am. Right? I heard that this was the Talmidim that was sitting in the base medrash. They said, "B'milva b'shus bailim l'chazora v'hu adin li'onsim kamifli." The machlokas tanoim with regard to alva is in a case where the original money that was given is still b'shlemus. It's still in the reshus of the loan. And at that point, do we say that the money is owned and possessed by the lova or by the malva? In other words, can the Malva now demand that he get back these mos? Or, for example, let's say some onus happened to these mos, and because of the onus, there was no negligence on the part of the lover doesn't have to pay him. And he writes here, Osho Medis he kvar legamri b'shuso shalov. Or should we say no? The money belongs to the lover. He doesn't have to pay the malva back. It was an onus. And the malva cannot say, well, the deal is off. And the possibility arises here that the lower is going to be higher for every onus. Demar Sava, let's go through the two sheetas. According to the Kamil Vishus Lova Kaima. Once the money was given over to the lover by the malva could not demand his money back, because again, the principle of milvelot son it, no? And who ideally owns him, the low is going to be chayav in all onus, that any tsunami that washes the mos into the sea. And therefore the Tanakama holds that the malva cannot be makadosh the isha with these mos because they already belong to her. He's not giving her anything new. And this is another extension and application of the principle of milva lo tzon. And that's called milva b'shus lova kind. And the malva cannot demand that money back. Umar Sover, but Rab Shimon ben Elazar is of the opinion, milva b'shus bailim kaima. The milva is owned by the malva. And he could be choser, as long as the mos is still available. For who adili owns him, the lov is not chayav be ones if, let's say, the money was washed away, the kesef alva, because he hasn't touched the mos yet. And if he hasn't touched the mos yet, the mos belong to the malva. And therefore, the malva can be mekadosh an isha with these mos. So again, the machlokas here is not about milva hotzah. We're talking about a case where there was no hotzah, and we want to know what the status of the mos is when the malva gives the mos to the lover and the mos is still available. If we say that the malva still owns the mos because the lover has not yet spent those mos, then number one, the malva could demand it back. And number two, if an onus happens, the malva has no recourse to demand payment from the lover. If on the other hand, I say the mos already all outside, even before the lover actually spent the mos, then the mos belong to the lover, and then Afkamin is going to be Makadosh B'milva, Eina Mekudeshes, because the mos belong to the lover, and he's not giving her anything new. And not only that, but if the mos get lost or destroyed by ones, then the lover is going to have to reimburse the malva for those mos. V'amina lehu onsim kuliyama lo pligi b'shus lova kaima my taima lo gora mishaela mashaela dahadra be'ene chayva onsim bilva lo kolshke.
Check anything?
Yes. So what was this response to this shtickle Torah of the Talmidim? This is Rabbah talking. He says, you know what? Let's make the following distinction. With regard to the chiyuv onsim, there's no machlokas at all. Kuliyama lo pligi dibrishus lova kaimi. It means the money was given over to the lover. It's his mos. And therefore, he has to pay for any owns. He has an outstanding chov. He's got to return that value. Again, he hasn't used the mos. And here, Rabbah activates a principle called logara mi she'ila. The din of these mos that were taken as alva is not worse than the din of she'ila. Let's say I borrow a kli from you. Ma she'ila dahadra b'yene chai ba'onsim. And now Rabbah applies a kal v'chomer in the case where I borrow a kli and I have to return the kli to you, hadra be'eni, exactly in its full be'en, in its actual physical kli, which means that it never left the reshus of the mashal. You lent it to me; it's your kli, and nevertheless, from the moment that I took the kli as a shoal into my reshus, I have to pay you the value of the kli, even if an onus happens. Is milva lo kolshkin, how much more so milva, which left the reshus of the malva, for sure it enters into the reshus of the lov, and he has to pay if there's an onus. He takes the loss, he's the bailim over the mos, even if he hasn't used them at all. So Rabbah says, so what is the subject of the machlok shin Tanakama and Reb Shimon? Aval hocha milva b'shus bailim l'chazori kebeinai. The machlokus is only not with regard to the chiv onsin, that for sure the lov has to pay for. But the din of chazor, the Tanakama holds that from the moment that halva was transferred, the money was transferred over to the shus of the lova makes a kinyan on the mos, that's called milva lo tzon, and the malva cannot say, oh, I want my money back. Here, you haven't even touched the money, I want it back. And therefore, if the malva has no rights over the mos, once he gave it as halva, it belongs to the isha, and therefore he can't be mekadosh or mekadosh milei mekudeshet. What does Reb Shimon Elazar hold? She hasn't used the mos yet. The lova hasn't used the mos, and right now it's considered as if the mos are ondos b'rshus hamalva. He has a right to say, the deal is off. I want my money back. And the male, if it's his money, it could be mekadosh and isha. So there's a deep lumdus here in this Gemara. On the one hand, Reb Shimon Elazar is now understood by Rabbah to mean that if the lova hasn't used the money yet, then the money is considered the reshus of the malva. But on the other hand, if an onus happens, Rabbah's already assumed, based on a kavachom from She'ela, that certainly the lova is going to have to pay for that onus. There's a brisket tzvei din here. Because again, to reiterate Rabbah's position, be onsim, legabi onsim, kuliyamalo pligi, the reshus lova kaima, and the lova has to pay for onsim. Let me just think about it for 1 minute, if Rabbi, you have an insight here. So I think again you have to distinguish between the be'en and the chov. What do I mean? According to Reb Shimon Elazar, the be'en of the mos belong to the malva, but in terms of a chov, it's logara mishaela, and therefore he's responsible for onsim. So whereas the Rabbanan hold that with the matan mos, even though the lova hasn't touched them, two things have happened. Number one, the mos are transferred over to the reshus of the lova. And number two, the chov emerges to pay for the mos and replace them in an event that ba'onus they were lost or destroyed. Whereas according to Reb Shimon Elazar, only one thing has happened. With the transfer of the mos, there's a chov of a like a she'ela chov to pay for these moles. You took upon yourself responsibility to return the moles. If the moles are lost, then go into your bank account, write them a check, and pay for the moles, replace the moles. But since the lova has not yet used the moles, then we haven't yet activated milvalot son, and then the moles actually belong to the malva. So it's a very strange conclusion here. You could have, this is like a quiz question, Ripley's Believe It or Not in our halachic universe. You can have the ownership of the malva, and yet the lov is responsible for the mos. You would say, well, wait a minute. If the malva owns the mos, and therefore you can be makadosh and isha with these mos, then if the mos are lost or destroyed, that's the malva's headache. The lova doesn't have to pay that. Nay, there's another halacha here in Matan Mos of a halva of chiyuvei shomer, of chiyuvei she'ela. And you have a chov now to replace these mos in the event that they're lost or destroyed. So the Gemara raises the following kasha. V'ela hodi omer avhuna hashoel kardom mechavero ubika bo. So I borrow an axe and I start cutting up a log of wood. No. What does that mean, kno? It means the kinyonei she'ela are complete, are clinched. The mashil can't say to him, well, give me back the kardom. But lo bika, but lo kno. The mashil could demand back his axe until the shoel has used the axe on one particular occasion. Is Rav Huna getting into a machlokas tanoim? Because Rav Huna is assuming that the kardum belongs to the mashil until the shoel uses it. Well, guess what? That reflects the shita of Shimon ben Elazar, who holds that the mos of the alva are in the reshus of the malva until the lova uses them. But it contradicts the shita of the Tanakama, who holds that immediately upon Matan Mos, even if the lova has not yet used them, the mos are now in the reshus of the lova. And that's why Mekadosh B'milva Eina Mekudeshes. So even though the lova hasn't yet used the mos, it's already transferred into the reshus of the lova. And that's against Rav Huna. So the Gemara says, lo. Rav Huna is not contradicted by the Chachamim. Ad kan lo pligi. When do the Chacham disagree with Rab Shimon? Ela b'milva. Da hadra b'yene. The lover doesn't give back the same mos halva that he received from the lover, wrapped up in that bag, in that pouch. He's going to give back mos, acheros, other mos, and that'll replace the halva. Therefore, the Tanakhama holds that immediately when the lover receives the mos belong to the lover. But in the case where he borrowed an axe, and the axe has to be returned in its be'en form, is then the chayfetz never really left the reshus of the mashil, and divriyakol bikabo in lo bikabo lo. When does the shoel clinch his bailus? In which case he'll have to pay for onsin. That's only after he uses it, and the first use becomes a ma'aser kinyon she'el. So Gemara says, name a ketanoit. Maybe the din of Rava Makadosh B'milva depends upon the following machlokas tanoim. Is kadshi li b'shtar cho. Excuse me. She borrowed X amount of money, and they wrote up a shtar. The shtar was given over to the malva, and now the malva gives the shtar to the isha for kiddushin. Oh, shahaylo milva v'yad acherim the hirshal lamb. So this Makadesh was a balchov, other people owed him money. and he writes our shah to pass over that chov that is owed to him will now be owed to the isha. Rabbi Meir Omer Kudesh. V'chachamim Omrim Eina Mekudeshes. What's the case of a shtar chov? If we're talking about others who owe him money and he's holding on to a shtar chov, then you're repeating exactly the same case of the Arsha. Elolav. We have no choice but to assume that the Bryce is talking about shtar chov didel. No, that she borrowed money from him and gave him a shtar. And therefore, what's the machlokus? Whether when he gives her the shtar, she's mekudesh or not? They're arguing about this principle of Ra. In other words, Rabbi Meir holds milva lavlot son nitna, and as long as she hasn't spent the most, they still are in the ownership of the rishus of the malva, and therefore you can be kaddish nisha. Whereas the chacham hold milva lavlot son nit like Rab, and the malva has already relinquished ownership over the most. And therefore he's not giving her most for Kiddushin, ain't a Kudeshes. So the din of Rav depends on how close Tanam. Liolam says no. It's a shtarchov that's owed, money that's owed to the Baal from someone else. And the machlokes here revolves about, the machlokes about Makadish b'milva in its milva v'yad revolves around the following issue. When he lent money to someone else, and that person, that Lova, wrote him a shtar, and now he's giving that shtar over to Nisha for Kiddushin, and he's being Mekadosh with the Mesira shtar chov. That's one machlokas tanoim, and there's another machlokas tanoim in the case of Milva Balpeh, where there was no shtar written, and he's being Mekadosh now by giving her a harsha, which allows her to collect that chov from Acheret. And since they argue in these two dinim, the Bryce has to double up its language. But if he's Mekadosh and issue with the chov itself, then everybody agrees Eina Mekudeshes like Rav, because Mekadosh b'milva Eina Mekudeshes milva lo tzon nitna. So we're up to Mekadosh b'shtar b'may pligi. What is the issue here in the case of Mekadosh b'shtar? And this has to do with the famous machlokas about osios niknos b'mesira. We don't have time to go into it now, but I'll just give you a basic principle that I heard from my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, many, many years ago. And that is, we don't know exactly how to define a shtar. Is the shtar considered like the chov itself? Or no, the shtar is only like a raya to allow the collection of the chov. And the nafkamina is going to be in osios niknas b'mesira. Can I take this shtar and give it to you? And now you're kona with this shtar, the chov. And Rebbe is of the opinion, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that osios niknas b'mesira. The Chacham rejected it. And the Chachamim say, no, you need a new kinyan in order to transfer ownership over the chov. Bein shekosav lo mosav, ubein shemosav lo kosav lo kona sheyichtov v'yimsar. Mar islay the Rabbi, umar leslay the Rabbi. The machlokas is about a milv b'shtar, and this is the old machlokas Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi about osios niknos b'mesira. So a person is selling a shtar chov to his friend. Somebody owes him money, and here's the shtar, and he can transfer the chov over to his friend by transferring the shtar to him. Chacham omrim bein shekosav v'lo mosar ubein shemosav v'lo kosav v'lo kona ad sheyichtov v'yimsa. So the Gemara explains that even Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are arguing in a case where a man was Mekadosh and Isha with a shtar chov sheish lo alacherim, and he transfers the shtar over to her, but he didn't write her on her behalf a separate shtar. And Ma Rabbi Meir, who holds that the Kiddushin is valid when he gives her the shtar chov islay the Rebbe, accepts Rebbe osios niknos b'mesiru. Mar Chachamim hold leslay the Rebbe, and therefore he cannot be Mekadosh her by giving her the shtar, because without writing another shtar, she does not acquire ownership over the chov. Ibois ema The Gemara offers an alternative explanation. The Kuli Alma Leslie the Rebbe. Nobody agrees, nobody accepted the principle of Rebbe of Osios Nikdos b'Mesira. And the Bryce is talking about a case where the Makadish gave a shtarcho